Hey, hi, I'm Lindsay and you're gonna art with me today. We're gonna paint this painting over here. I don't have a name for it and I'm tired of trying to think of them, so call it what you want. It's a night sky with what I'm gonna call birch trees. A little bit of green got in there, so they might look a little bamboo-y. It's whatever you want it to be. Today we're going to start with the background and sort of move our way forward. It's all about layers. So as I'm doing that, I want to point out that I'm going to move really quickly and the paint's not going to be dry. So if you want to stop at any time and let the paint dry, give it a pause and then come back to it, I would highly recommend it. I'm just going to go for it because I know how to lay paint down. Before we get started, let's go over supplies. So I have a 16 by 20 canvas. I'm going to start off nice and fresh. Sometimes the canvas has a little bit of something on it, so if you wanted to take a second before you started painting and cover it with a coat of white paint, that might help you move the paint around and it won't dry as quickly. Also, if you wanted to follow along with me on a smaller scale and do what we call thumbnails, paint it on a piece of paper and then you've kind of got something to look at, and then you can paint it on a bigger piece at your own pace. I like to do that because I can kind of work out composition and take the things that I like from that and then change the things that I don't to make a better, bigger painting. Before we get into it, I want to make sure I've got all my paint. I'm only using 4 colors today, so I'm going to use yellow, blue, white, and black. I'm using a lot of blue and white, so I'm going to make sure I've got plenty of that. I've got some leftover extras in my little tubs here. I also have red, so just in case I decide to change something up as I'm going through here, I always want to have the whole color wheel plus black and white. I've got what I call palettes, so these are not paper plates, they're palettes. Makes you feel super fancy. I have this one for my regular paint, and then I'm always going to mix on an extra palette just to have a few of them on hand are good. You can also use pieces of paper, pieces of cardboard, a little piece of wood, and then let it dry and kind of build up. It's a lot of fun. And then I've got 2 brushes. So I have a large brush and a small brush, so a big guy and a small guy. These are usually what I use. If you want to get fancy and work something in between, that's up to you. And then I'm going to use a rag today. You can use paper towels. I like this rag because not only does it look pretty after I've used it a few times, but it's, you know, saving the environment and all that. All right, and then water cup. So you can see I reused the water cup too. This is a little bit flimsy. I might do a mason jar. They work really well. And then before we get started, I have made a coloring book, and with all this going on, I'm taking tips and donations on my PayPal Me. So if you donate at $10 or more to my PayPal Me, I'm going to send you a link to get a downloadable coloring book. It's 12 pages of awesome coloring plus a cover and a back. So you can print it out yourself at home, you can color it online, you can print it out for the kid down the street. Just don't share the link to a bunch of people, it's good. So if you donate $10 or more, we'll go ahead and send you that link, and then you can do different coloring pages. They are mermaids of dogs and cats, and then I threw a couple extra little guys in there to kind of keep things fresh. All right, so we're going to get started. I'm going to work really fast. So I'm going to start from the top and work my way down. I'm going to take blue and my big brush. I'm going to use what I call a generous amount of paint. I'm going to keep it real handy. I'm going to move kind of quick because to get this background, I want to make sure that the blue is still wet by the time I get that white in there. So I've got a whole bunch of blue, and I'm going to start just slapping this on here. My blue is pretty thin, so you can kind of see the background in that. So the thicker the better here. But I don't want it to drip, so you're going to have to find a nice medium because that's going to start dripping. All right, I'm taking the blue about halfway down the canvas. I'm pushing pretty hard to make sure I work into all those little nooks and crannies because the next time that I come back into it, I'm probably going to have a lighter hand. It's about halfway down-ish. All right, so I'm going to decide on a horizon line. I'm rinsing out my big brush. Doesn't have to be totally rinsed out because we're just going to go right back into blue. I want to make a horizon line a little lower than halfway, so I've got my blue about halfway across. I'm going to come down about 2 to 3 fingers and give myself a strip of white. So I'm going to go all the way across here And then I'm going to bring it up into the blue, just so I don't have any open canvas between where that blue ends and the white begins. All right, so here's the fun part. I'm not going to wash my brush. I'm just going to squeeze and pull that paint off. Because what I want to do is take 2 laps of a very nice, light, dry brush. So what I'm going to do is from the white to the blue, I'm going to do quick strokes going from the bottom up. And I don't want to go all the way up off the canvas, but I am going to go pretty high. As I work around, I don't want them to be the exact same height, so I'm going to kind of go down a little bit here. I'll go up a little higher, starting to look like a pattern, so I'm going to break that up. The big thing with this is to not go over those spots too many times, because now I've got this really cool sort of strippy color. I'm not done yet. This top up here, I want it to be a little more variation, I want it to have a little more variation from the top going down. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to wipe my brush off here, make sure it's dry, and I'm going to sweep down. As I do that, you can see it sort of mixes back into that white. I do what I call a one and done situation. So once I've gone over that section, I'm going to leave it. Do a nice little artist lean to kind of look and see what you got going on here. And I'm going to call it good. So this is now our sky. I can start working on the water. The water I'm going to move kind of quickly too. It's mostly going to start out with just a big streak of, or a big patch of blue. So I'm going to get that in, and then we're going to do another dry brush technique, but in a sort of different way. So I've got a sort of wiped off brush. I'm going to make my horizon line a little bit cleaner. So I push down with a good amount of paint here. A little bit of that white is going to show through, which is good because I'm going to end up with a little bit of white going through there anyways. So let's just move this around. All right, almost there. You can see how I'm pushing that paint into it. I don't want it to be super globby because it'll never ever dry, but I do want to have a nice coat over it. All right, so now I have a big block of blue, which is not super interesting. I'm going to keep going in these horizontal strokes. I want to get, well, I'm going to dry this off just a little bit, frayed out. And then I'm going to get a little bit of white just on the edge here. I don't want too much because I'm going to do a dry brush and I'm going to kind of drag the tip of my brush across this. So I'm going to dip in the white, and then I'm going to tap on my plate just to make sure I don't have too much. And then what I want to do is hold the brush a little more parallel with the canvas, and I'm going to kind of drag back and forth here. So what it's going to do is give me these really uneven bits of white. Trying not to do a pattern. Try not to go over them too many times, but a little bit gives you some blend. All right, that looks pretty good to me. So I could have a lot of fun, keep going over this. I don't want that to be a pattern. But if I keep going, it's just gonna all blend into one color, and I don't wanna do that. And this is really just the base. So if you're gonna be frustrated on something or work really hard to get something really cool, let's wait till we get to those trees. We're not there yet. We're gonna do a layer before we start to do the trees, which is gonna kind of help us work out any kinks that we might have when we do our birch trees. So I'm gonna put the big brush in the water for a minute here, and we're gonna use our small brush. We're gonna mix sort of a light gray color, and we're gonna do our first section of sort of brush to give us like a landmass, and then a few little hints of trees in the background that are just gonna give us a little bit of shadow and depth. So we're gonna make gray. Gray has a whole lot of shades to it, so I'm gonna go something in the middle of black and white. I've got a lot of white, and I'm gonna keep doing just a little bit of black until I get a color that I want. Sort of a silver gray. If I hold it up to this, I might go a little bit darker so that when I do my birch trees, they're not gonna be too much of the same color. Let's see, where are you gonna see this? If I do it here, that's a good color. You can see I kind of mixed it. It's not all the way mixed in. I'm fine. It's the background, and we're going to cover most of this up. So what I want to do is decide on how far out my landmass is going to be, and then I'm going to throw a couple of streaks of gray into it. I want to remind you that your paint is going to be super. I've got some tips on how to use your brush and the amount of paint to kind of swoosh that through. So I've got a good amount of paint on the end of my small brush, and I'm going to go a little bit to my right of center. So if this is the center, I'm going to go a little bit farther, and I'm going to just bring it from there over. That's going to tell me where my land is starting and where it stops. I like to do brush in just little taps and X's. So I'm going to kind of tap real light on the edge and then move my wrist back and forth to get these little mounds of what I'm calling brush. Let it mix into that background. Lots of different variations are really fun. I don't want this to be a pattern, so I'm going to try to break this up a little bit. I want to have a higher section over here. And then I'm going to try to keep in mind I do have some green brush that comes in on top of this. So I want to make sure I have sections that I know won't be covered up. And I'm going to bring it right off the canvas. I'm not super worried about that horizon line because we'll do a little bit of finessing before it's done. And I'm going to call that my brush. So I wanted to make sure that it wasn't zigzaggy in a pattern all the way over. If you decide that you've done that, just take a section and give yourself another little mound. Now it's a little more uneven and looks like it'll happen in nature. All right, so the trees. These ones, I'm just gonna use my small brush, and the trees are gonna be as thick as my small brush will lay paint down. Because that background is really super duper wet, we're gonna do, each tree has 2 laps. So the first lap, I'm just gonna go through, I'm not gonna worry about whether the paint is laying down or not, I'm just gonna set down where my trees are gonna go. And then the second lap is gonna be with a bunch of paint, and I'm just gonna do a nice light sort of slopping the paint on there, just to kind of get that color. So I've got my brush, I've got my gray color, I'm gonna decide on where these trees are gonna go. If you're really nervous, start over to the side where we're gonna end up covering it with a bunch of other trees. So we can start here and go up. See, it kind of went away and came back, it's fine. I'm gonna go over here, I wanna do one that's leaning. Let's see, I'm gonna do 2 more just to keep it even-ish. That one's got a little bump to it, and this one's gonna cross right over it. I have 4 trees. They kind of drift in and drift out. They actually left a good amount of paint there, but just in case yours didn't, I'm going to take a big glob of paint. I'm going to hold my brush sort of more parallel, and then very lightly, I'm going to lay these globs down and drag. The cool thing about this painting is you don't want it to be a super solid line because it'll kind of take away from all the definition we're going to put in with just our brush strokes. Got 2 more to do here. Oh, I've got a piece of dry paint that fell off. All right. There's my background trees. And I've got that big glob of paint that fell. What I'm gonna do is take my dry hand and roll up. And it's gone. Just to kind of finesse. I don't have any paint on my big brush. I'm going to lightly drag through here. And that little section that had a bunch of gray in it is gone. And I'm also not super worried about it because later on, we're going to have a bunch of reflections down in the water, so it'll cover up anything that you're not super fond of. All right, so we've got our gray background trees. It looks a little bit gloomy right now. We're going to brighten it up. We're going to make yellow. We're going to make a yellow-green color, just to do our brush and sort of start in with our background layers. So I'm going to make this green a little bit darker. I'm going to use my big brush so I make sure I have enough. And this is going to be the 3 colors that we're using. So I'm going to get a big old scoop of white. I'm going to get a big scoop of yellow and sort of a smaller scoop of blue and mix this in. Probably not going to be the exact color that I want, so I can add just a little more blue at a time until I get the color. Let's see. I'm going to go a little bit darker, even though this is a really pretty color. I'm going to start with it to be a little bit darker just so that with the layers that we put in, it's going to give us a nice piece of depth. Yeah, that's good. It's probably a little more blue than my first one, but I'm going to go with it. I could noodle on making different colors all day. Yeah, I like this color. All right, so I don't need too much paint in the brush bristles, so I'm just going to sort of smash down and roll my brush around to kind of get some of that off there. And then what I want to do with these is I'm going to use the tip of my brush and I'm going to do these downward little swipes. As I'm doing that, I'm going to kind of go back and forth and I'm going to give myself some patches. So this is going to be a setup to where my trees are going to go. I'm going to do a little bit off the side here so you can see what that color looks like. Make these little round parts. There's a bunch of tree going on up here. I'm going to do a bunch over here. Let it carry over to that one. Not all of these are going to make any sense until we get another tree on there. And then I always like to give just a couple of extra small little guys. So let's do one there and there and there. Seems like a good first layer of our tree. And now that that's on there, I'm going to kind of let that dry a little bit and we're going to move down into our horizon line and put that brush in there. I want to use the same color, just a little bit different of a technique. This one is going to be a little more of a tap, so I'm going to kind of move my brush back and forth like this. And I really only need paint right in the tip of this. So I'm going to start over here, and then as I work down, I want to go just short of where the gray stops. So I can see some of that gray coming out, so it kind of looks like there's a little more land going on off to the side there. I don't know why I'm picking it up. All right, so I'm going to do my little taps, just using the tip of my brush. And I'm going to go through, I want to cover up some of this gray. I left some at the top area there. Moving on over, and I'm going to let it drop off. There we go. All right. So this is our first layer of brush. Now that we've got this down, we can talk about doing our birch trees. And the reason that we did some of the brush and the leaves first is so that when we put in our leaves, it looks like there's leaves behind our trees and there's leaves in front of it. Again, it's just another thing to add depth. So I'm going to move back into my small brush. And we're going to make a lighter gray color, and these are going to be our trees. I've kind of went all over this first plate, so I'm going to move into a next one. And when I do this, I'm going to get a whole bunch of white and just a little bit of black, because I want it to be really light. And the color that you're painting with is going to dry just a little bit darker than what you see. So I'm going to hold this up, lighter than my first gray. I think I'll be able to see it, and I might just make a little bit more because it's really hard to make the same color twice. I would rather have some paint left over than trying to make it after this. All right, so the trees. I'm going to do, I think I did 4 over here. Yeah, it seems like a good number. I'm going to do the 4 trees again. I'm going to do this the same first, and then I'll kind of change it up a little bit. So the first lap is going to be to lay down where my trees are going to go. And then when I'm done with that, I'm going to come through and do that second lap where I'm kind of thickening in the paint, but I'm also going to thicken the trees a little bit. So first lap, I'm going to decide on where I want them. I'm making new trees. I'm not trying to go over these ones. So as I go into it, I want to start here, and then I might make this one go right off the corner there. That's my first tree. Moving over, I really like that there's 2 coming up at the same sort of spot. So I'm going to do that with this. There and then here. And then one more. I'm going to go a little bit curvy and then straightens out. So I know where they're going. You can see that that blue really kicked in there. And now I'm going to do that same thing that I did before. So I cleaned out my brush. I'm going to dry it off. I'm going to take a good amount of paint, and then I'm really going to just drag that paint on. I'm not pushing down very hard at all. And as I'm doing this, I'm going to make these trees a little bit thicker. So So I'm gonna make these about the width of my pinky and not really any bigger than that. I just don't want them to be super duper thick and right up off the end of the canvas. I don't know how well you can see it, but that color is still coming through and it's totally fine. It's gonna give us a little bit of sort of variation and gradient in our trees. And we're also gonna cover a lot of this up with the little streaks. So I'm just going through with globs of paint. I'm gonna push this around, and before it gets too mixed in, I'll grab some more paint and kind of move over. If it starts to get a little wonky, don't worry. If there's a spot that you don't like in your tree, we can go ahead and put a new piece of leaves over it. So anything you don't like, we can go ahead and cover with happy little leaves. And all I'm really trying to do is pull these trees out from the background. So with the color being lighter, if a little bit of green gets in there, just like I said at the beginning, if you want it to be bamboo trees, great, go for it. It's whatever you decide it is, nobody can tell you any different. So I've got this last one, and then I'm gonna take one more lap, well I guess two more, because I'm gonna start with a clean small brush. Once I get this last little bit, I'm gonna wash my brush out. There we go. So I'm gonna keep with my small brush. I'm rinsing it out. Got some white. So I'm gonna start with white and then I'm gonna go through with black. There's a big old glob of paint right there. That's gonna give me a little trouble later. Go ahead and get that off. So with the white and the black, I'm gonna go through and do little roundy dashes. And I feel like you're not gonna be able to see the white very well. Oh, maybe not. So I'm gonna move kind of quickly. Again, if there's anything in these little streaks that you don't like, you can cover. I want to make sure that I'm remembering that I've got another set of these to put in, so don't go crazy with the white. And then I'm trying to make sure I don't have a pattern, so each tree doesn't have the exact same little dashes in the same little spots. I went out on a couple of these little bits, not on purpose. I'm not worried about it either. Again, it's a painting and it's painted in half an hour. All right, one more, doing little dashes. Some of them go all the way across. Some start on the edge. Some are right, just a little dash in the middle. There was the white. So I'm just gonna wipe off my small brush and do the same thing in black. So I've got my black, doing little dashes, with a little bit of a curve to them. And I'm gonna keep moving around. Keep doing artist leans to make sure that it's not uniform or a pattern in any kind of way. And I'm not worried about the bottom yet because we're gonna cover that with our little extra layers of brush. It's really starting to mix into that background, so I'm just gonna grab more paint and a lighter hand. Don't push down so hard. There we go, one last tree. And then we'll talk about the next set of leaves. All right, so I'm done with the small brush for a second. I've got my background trees, I've got my background leaves. Now we need to do some foreground trees in front of that first set, or that second set that we had just done. These are gonna be, it's the same colors mixed in. If you've got more green like I do here, I'm just gonna add a little bit more white and a little bit more yellow. So I've got a whole bunch of that green that I started with. I want it to be lighter and more yellow, so I'm gonna go ahead and grab these, throw it on there. I need a little more white, I think. I'm just gonna use what I have here and lighten it up. All right, might go a little bit more. Just to really make sure there's some contrast there. That's great. And the second set of leaves, it's the same situation as the first. I have a whole bunch of paint on this brush. I'm gonna scrape it off. And, geez, so much paint on this brush. All right, so now I'm gonna keep tapping. There's a lot of wet paint under this, so as I'm going through, I really just want to do that one and done situation. I like to start where it doesn't matter so much, so I'm going to go up here. If you're trying to stick with those little shapes that you made before, go on the higher sections of that. You want a lot of that to be a little more on top so that it looks like you've got some light coming in and there's a little bit of shading in there. I'm going to bounce around. I want to make parts that aren't with that same little piece. Let's go one little bit here. All right. I could do that all day, but I'll end up covering the whole thing. So I've got my first layer of darker green, and the second one is sort of a medium green. I'm going to do the same bit down in here, so I'm going to do my little dashes. I'm going to stay a little more up top of these, cover my trees, and then just little taps right on the end there, so the tops of those kind of pull out a little bit. There we go. Now it looks like I've got brush. The trees don't have just a kind of blunt end there, and I've got some nice leaves going on in the top. The next thing that I want to do is that last layer of leaves, so I'm going to do sort of a highlight up top. What I'm going to do is just wipe my brush off and then use some of the white that I've got left, and I'm going to tap onto it because we've got so much paint that's wet on here. It's going to mix in really fast, so it'll give us sort of different degrees of brightness. It'll be really bright when you start and then start to mix in. So as I'm going through, you'll see that I'll start in one section where I want it to be really bright and then I'll move around. And then I might start where I sort of ended, kind of on top of parts that ended that were a little more blended, just to make sure I get that little bit of highlight. I don't have a ton of white left, that's okay. I'm just grabbing that very tip of my brush, and I'm going to do a lot less of this right on the tops of my lightest sections of green. So you can see how it starts to sort of blend out. I'm grabbing some more here. I'm going to move through. You don't have to do every single piece, but definitely those ones that are a little more on the outside, because that's where the light's going to kind of hit. All right, little guy. Oh, another little guy. And that looks good. They're not super duper blended, so I'm just going to wipe off my brush. I'm going to take a quick lap through some of these sections and make it look a little less blobby. There we go. And I'm just doing a super duper light tap, just to push that paint around a little more. All right. So our trees and our brush are pretty much done. There's a little bit more we got to do in the water here, and I'm going to switch back over to my small brush. Yep, I was deciding on what I wanted to do there. All right, so to do these, what I want to do is give myself some reflections down over here, but I also want to put a little bit of white here. So I'm going to start with that. I used almost all of my white, and I want this to be kind of clean, so I'm going to grab some more. All right. So these streaks, they're kind of a dry brush streak, and I want to make sure that they're not uniform, so I'm just going to kind of move my hand back and forth. I want it to be sort of straight, and I'm going to drag this paintbrush kind of back and forth across here. So you get that sort of wake texture, and it's not taking over that blue. So I'm going to do a little bit more over here. I want to do some on this side over here, and then we're going to move into some color. All right, before I get too carried away with streaking the white. Now I'm going to do the color back here. What I'm going to try to mimic a little bit is where the brush is. I'm going to do a little more green. And then as it kind of drifts away, I don't need so much of the green. And then I'll come back in with some of our birch colors and sort of streak them in the general area I think that the tree would sort of reflect. So I'm not going to do the gray everywhere, but I am going to do the green. Not everywhere, just underneath where these are. And I'm going to do the same thing where it's a dry brush. I've got that color. And I want to make sure that I get enough little strokes off the end that it doesn't look like the painting just stops right there. A little more. There we go. And I've still got a little bit of my darker green. I'm going to go ahead and throw some of that in too. A little bit closer to my horizon line. And just a few strokes down in here. Have fun with it. All right, so this part really makes that reflection look cool. We're gonna do these little bits of birch tree. I do quick dashes, and I'm not gonna call it a line, I'm gonna call it in vertical sections. So I've still got some of that gray left, it's not a whole lot. And what I wanna do is sort of follow where the tree is. I know for sure there's tree there. And as I go down, it goes off to that corner. So this one's gonna go off to this corner. So I'm gonna do little dashes. Got a lot of water on my brush there. And before it looks like a pattern, I'm gonna kind of break it up. So you're kind of doing what we did with the white and black on the birch trees, just down in the water. And I'm doing this with gray. And I don't wanna do this with solid black. I'm gonna use my dirty brush when I grab some black. Ooh, that looks like a pattern too much. And I've got one more tree here. There we go. So it looks kind of weird. Once I get into it with the black, which is now going to be gray with my dirty brush, it kind of shows you what it's trying to be. Everything here is implied. So again, it's whatever you say it is. A little bit more here. Before I get too carried away, I'll move over. So I'm going to do one last lap here. And this last lap is going to be with white. And I just want to give it a couple little good spots of clean wake. So if I look at this one, I've got a couple of spots here. And then over here, there's a couple of real bright spots. So that's what I want to get over here. Got that little bit of white that I redid over here. And then a one and done situation with a really light hand. It's going to help me get those. I'm going to drag that over because you can see where my brush started. All right. Couple right off the end just to make it nice. And I'm going to call it good. So there's a lot more you can do to this. You can go through, add more trees, add more background trees, add more colors. There's always going to be different colors in nature. This is just a really simple basic start to hopefully get you geared up and fired up and ready to color more. Speaking of coloring, remember if you do a $10 donation or more to my PayPal Me account, I'll send you a link to my coloring book. I worked pretty hard on it and I was ready to get it printed, and then everything sort of happened and now we're here. I want to make sure I can get it to you guys, so this just seems like the best way to go for now. And then hopefully we'll get it printed and we'll go ahead and send out one to anybody that did more than $10. I hope you enjoyed it. I think we'll do this again next week. If you have any ideas of what you would like me to paint, let me know, or a technique that you want to go over. Today we sort of did a dry brush blending. We did a whole lot of streaking and then we made some birch trees. I shouldn't have thought that was as funny as I do. Again, thank you to Christensen Media for being a man in a box over there and helping me do this. Sacramento Media Center for being available because I just don't have a way to do this at home. And as always, have a great week and I hope to see you next week.